Hello again, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about Maine, the pine tree state. I don't have much to say about Maine. I've always been intrigued by the name of the capital of Maine, which is Augusta, but can't say that I knew much about Maine prior to this exploration here. So, Maine achieved statehood March 15th, 1820, making it the 23rd state. As I said, the capital is Augusta. Population is 1.3 million, making it the 42nd most populous state. So it's pretty tiny as far as that goes. And as far as area goes, there's 35,385 square miles in the state, and that is approximately 91,646 kilometers squared, then making it the 39th largest state. So again, not very big, population or area-wise. The largest cities in Maine are Portland, Lewiston, Bangor, and South Portland. So again, another instance of the state capital not being one of the centers of population. And if you are familiar with the United States, you'll know that there's another state with Portland, that being Oregon. So when people talk about Portland, most of the time they're talking about Portland, Oregon, not Portland, Maine. But they both have a Portland. So the history of Maine... see here. I need to consult my notes real quick. So this the early settlers that came to Maine from Europe, initially in 1604, it was the French. So the Samuel de Champlain started mapping the region, the coastline, establishing friendly relationships with the natives. But it wasn't until the next year, in 1605, that Englishman George Weymouth sailed into Penobscot Bay and named the area New England. So that's kind of the start of the history there. So early 17th century English settlements started popping up here and there. The Plymouth Company in Massachusetts Bay. Now again, when we talk about New England, there's a large section of the United States in the northeast of the United States that is called New England, Maine being part of it. We've also got Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, all those states up there are part New York is part of New England. So they're all part of New England. And so they started settling this area. That's why I mentioned the Plymouth Company and Massachusetts Bay Company. They started setting up a lot of settlements in that area, trading with the natives. But the English and the French started having some friction there because the French wanted the resources. They wanted that particular area. And so there was and the English weren't willing to give it up, obviously. So there's a lot of rivalry going on there. And it lasted from 17th century to the mid-18th century. And this included the French and Indian Wars at that point. So Maine, the Massachusetts Bay Colony gained control over the area, and they kind of ran the place. So Maine was part of Massachusetts for 150 years. They started developing their own culture and identity, advocated for statehood. So in 1820, Maine achieved that statehood, became the 23rd state of the United States. And it was part of the Missouri Compromise. Now, if you know much about the history of the Civil War and things in the United States, the Missouri Compromise was a way to help balance the free states and the slave states. So if you let in a free state, you had to let in a slave state. So Maine entered as a free state and Missouri entered as a slave state. And that's how they maintained that balance. There was a lot of economic growth during the 19th century. There was a lot of expansion because of the forestry products, Maine being the pine tree state, had a lot of the timber that was so necessary at that point in history. Shipbuilding was a major industry at that point in time as well. When it came to the 20th century, they started diversifying into other areas: manufacturing, agriculture, tourism, that kind of thing. I want to back up just a little bit and touch on the Civil War. So Maine being so far to the north, it's up above, as you saw on the map. It's except for Alaska, it may be the most northern of the United States. And so it was pretty far away from the battlefields of the Civil War. They contributed quite a bit, though. So there was a lot of military and non-military aspects that they contributed to. So let's see. The Union was fervently supported by Maine, and they mobilized for the war effort. They sent thousands of people to enlist in the in the Union Army and Navy. At that point in time, because of how much they were contributing to the war effort, Maine gained a new nickname. They were called the Loyal State. The 20th Maine Volunteer Infantry Regiment, it was commanded by Colonel Joshua L. Chamberlain. They were a crucial component in the Battle of Gettysburg in July 1863, which kind of was one of the turning points of the battle, of the war, and started the North's eventual triumph over the South in the war. And Colonel Joshua Chamberlain was a very celebrated, heroic figure at that point in time. They also supported the war effort in shipbuilding and manufacture and agriculture by providing those necessary resources to the Union Army. The naval shipyards in Bath and Portland were constructing warships, and then they had the textile mills that were producing uniforms and other supplies. Because of how many people they sent, there were a lot of people who didn't come home from the Civil War. So there's a lot of monuments and things to fallen soldiers in Maine because of the Civil War there. As I mentioned before, Maine did industrialize in the 20th century. As far as climate goes, we have the coastline, so it's on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. It has over 3,500 miles of coastline and islands. There's all sorts of fishing villages, lighthouses. Acadia National Park is on Mount Desert Island and is a popular destination for tourists. So there's the coastline. And I did mention the islands. Maine is predominantly covered in forests, and that's why it earned the nickname the Pine Tree State. There's a lot of different tree species: pine, spruce, fir, maple, birch. There's all sorts of ties to the natural resources there. So there's quite a lot of timber and paper production industries that make their home in Maine. It is part of the Appalachian Mountains, or the Appalachian Mountain Range does extend into Maine, so it does have some mountains there. The state's highest peak is Mount Katahdin, and it's 5,267 feet tall, or 1,605 meters, and it's in Baxter State Park. There's a lot of hiking, camping, winter sports that go on in Maine. There's a lot of waterways, lakes, rivers, that kind of thing. The major rivers are Penobscot, Kennebec, Androscoggin, and Saco. If I'm mispronouncing them, I apologize in advance. Moosehead Lake, largest lake in New England. A lot of fishing, boating, and outdoor recreation that goes on in there. For the most part, Maine is a humid continental climate, which means that the winters are cold, and the average temperature is from 20 degrees Fahrenheit to 30 degrees, is -7 Celsius to -1 degree Celsius. It is common that it does get snowfall, particularly in the northern regions of the state. The summers are pretty mild. The temperature ranges from 70 degrees Fahrenheit to 80 degrees. That's 21 to 27 degrees Celsius. So yeah, that's kind of the geography and climate in a nutshell there. Now, industry in Maine: tourism, fishing, forestry, manufacturing, healthcare, education, technology, and agriculture. Those are the big ones in Maine. Tourism, there's so much to do with the natural part of the state, where you've got boating and fishing and hiking and all that kind of stuff. Going to the coast, going boating on the ocean, all that kind of stuff. They also have like historical lodgings and restaurants and whatever else, because Maine is in the older part of the United States, so it does have some of that historical thing. The historical ties back to the colonists and the first settlements, first permanent European settlements in the United States. Fishing and lobstering is a huge part of the Maine industry. There's a lot of fish, shellfish. Lobster is the most iconic seafood that comes from Maine. Lobstering is a crucial industry as part of the state of Maine. It's one of the largest producers of lobsters in the United States, which is rather interesting because, as I recall, in the early part of the settlement of the state, when lobsters didn't have that connotation of being a luxury item. They were seen as low-class food, even, and it eventually changed. I'm not sure how, but that's what I've understood. So we've got the forestry and the wood products, wood timber, wood products. We have lumber, paper, and other wood-based materials. They have a manufacturing sector, so machinery, electronics, transportation, processed food, all sorts of stuff there. Healthcare, excuse me. There's numerous hospitals, medical centers, research institutions in Maine. We have education as well. Education in education is probably a huge industry in all 50 of the United States, just because of the universities and whatnot that do contribute to driving technology and innovation in other industries. So, private schools, public and private schools, colleges, universities are all part of that. Technology, they're working on software development, biotechnology, renewable energy, information technology. And then we have the agricultural sector of the state that produces potatoes, blueberries, dairy products, apples, and, of course, maple syrup. So For those of you who are not from the United States or Canada and have never tasted maple syrup, you should try some. I highly recommend them with pancakes or waffles. So, let's see. Some companies that are headquartered in Maine, some of the large companies that are headquartered, Hannaford Supermarkets, IDEX Laboratories, which is veterinary diagnostics and software solutions for the veterinary side of life anyway. We have LL Bean, Bath Iron Works, it's a major shipyard, Wex Inc., their payment processing and business solutions, Tyler Technologies, it's a software company that specializes in integrated software solutions for government, schools, and public sectors. Dead River Company, it's one of the largest energy providers in Maine. The Cyanbro Corporation, not entirely sure. Construction and engineering, they have the Maine Health, largest healthcare system in Maine. So there you go. If you're interested in those kind of things, look to Maine. Tourism. Acadia National Park, I mentioned that before, located on Mount Desert Island. It's got the coastline, the granite peaks, there's lakes and wildlife, so there's scenic trails. Apparently there's some mountains over there called Cadillac Mountains. You also can bike, and there's Bar Harbor that's there. There's a lighthouse, Portland Headlight, that's iconic in the United States. There's Old Port Portland. It's the historic district of Portland. Kennebunkport, it's the coastal town. Very much a typical, like stereotypical New England town with the New England architecture right there on the coast and everything. There's the history of Kennebunkport, then there's the beaches that are nearby. The Walker's Point, which is the summer residence of the Bush family, is there. Mount Desert Island, as I said, it's not just Acadia National Park that's there. It's also Bar Harbor, and then Jordan Pond House. Apparently it's famous for popovers. Boothbay Harbor is another one. Moosehead Lake, as I said, it's the largest lake in New England, and boating, kayaking, fishing, the wilderness area that's surrounding. I have no idea how to pronounce this. It's part of the coastal area, sandy beaches and stuff that you would expect with being on the coast. It's Ogunquit. Don't quote me on that. But there's also the Marginal Way. It's a coastal path that, if you're interested in like the scenery aspect. Portland Museum of Art. It's a huge art museum that has American, European, contemporary art. Winslow Homer, John Singer Sargent, and Andrew Wyeth are just some of the names of the artists who've contributed, who have exhibits in that museum. Allagash Wilderness Waterway. You can explore the backcountry by canoeing, kayaking, and just getting around that way, exploring Maine. All right, into the trivia. This is the part, as I said, that I enjoy the most. Maine has a state dessert. It's called the whoopie pie, and I misspelled it on there. It does have an E on the end. It has 2 cookies that are of cake consistency and sweet cream filling. Maine is known for blueberries, and it produces more wild blueberries than any other state in the country. Maine produces 99% of the wild blueberry crop in the United States. In Bangor, Maine, it's home to the world's largest statue of Paul Bunyan. who was a legendary lumberjack. It was the statue is 31 feet tall and around 3,700 pounds. If you're unfamiliar with Paul Bunyan is a folk hero from the United States. He was said to be a giant, dragging his axe along behind him on the ground, carved the Grand Canyon. He had a giant blue ox that he befriended and whose name is Babe the blue ox. So we have our folk heroes, and Paul Bunyan is one of them. The world's shortest international bridge. It bridges Calais, Maine, and it's connected to St. Stephen in New Brunswick, Canada. The bridge is called the Calais Milltown International Bridge, and it is 347 feet long. The world's largest lobster roll in 2009, Rockland, Maine, created the world's largest lobster roll. It was 61 feet long and contained 48 pounds of lobster. Yeah. Anyway, Stephen King is from Maine, so if you've read any of his books, a lot of them are set in Maine. He took a lot of inspiration from the towns that he grew up in and the state itself. So, let's see. Maine, it being that it's so far east, it's the first place in the United States where the sun rises. So if you're interested in that, there you go. West Quoddy Head is the point there. It's the easternmost point of the contiguous United States. And it's in Lubeck. And then we have Moxie. Moxie is a carbonated soft drink that was developed and originated in Maine. Possibly the first mass-produced soft drink in the United States. It was created by Dr. Augustin Thompson of Union, Maine in 1884. So yeah. Let's see. In Maine, it is illegal to catch lobsters on Sundays. The law was originally enacted to allow the lobsters to rest, so they weren't overfished, but it's not very well enforced today. You cannot use tomatoes to bait your lobster traps. I'm not sure exactly why. From what I've read, the law was enacted to discourage people from using perishable bait that could cause contamination in the water. But the thing is that by nature, the bait would be perishable. I mean, even if you just used fish as the bait, it's still a perishable bait. So that doesn't necessarily make sense to me. It was also said that it was enacted to keep from attracting non-target species, so to keep invasive species out, apparently. Anyway, you cannot advertise Christmas sales, and I love this. I hate when I start getting bombarded with Christmas sales and stuff right after Halloween, which is October 31st for those people who are from countries that don't have Halloween. As soon as Halloween is over, and sometimes even a little bit before that, you'll start seeing stores putting up their Christmas displays. I hate that. It drives me crazy because there's a holiday that comes between Christmas and Halloween, and that's Thanksgiving. I feel that I should be allowed to celebrate Thanksgiving without having Christmas intrude upon it. I'm already having to deal with what do they call it? Trying to remember what the name of it is. Black Friday. I may talk about that in another video. But anyway, You cannot advertise Christmas sales until after Thanksgiving. It is illegal, which is awesome. I love that. You cannot whistle underground in South Berwick. Who knows why, but yeah, it's still a law there that you cannot whistle underground. It's illegal to have firearms or a shotgun in a cemetery. Apparently, this was to maintain peace and sanctity of the cemeteries, so you can't bring a gun into the cemetery. I mean, I get it. If you're unhappy with somebody's family and whatnot, and you don't want them to show up at your wedding at a funeral for a family member with a gun. But it seems really odd that they would have to put this on the books. Were they having that many people with guns show up to the cemeteries? Anyway, you cannot carry glue around with you. If you carry a small tube of adhesive glue without a prescription, I don't know where you get a prescription from. I didn't know that doctors prescribed glue. It's a violation of the law. So it was intended to prevent the misuse or abuse of adhesive substances. I guess it could have roots in huffing. And if you haven't heard of huffing, it's where people inhale like paint fumes and stuff in order to get high. Could be something about that. You cannot have a flamingo in a barbershop. It is against the law to display a live flamingo in a barbershop window. I don't know. But yeah, there you go. So that's it for Maine. Hope you enjoyed the video. We'll be moving on to Massachusetts next. No, not Massachusetts. Maryland. Maryland, then Massachusetts. Maryland will be the next state we explore. So if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Like, subscribe, put the bell on so you get notified about my next videos, and see ya.